The thunder of hooves echoed across the dusty plains as Gemma Keller raced toward Silvercreek, her heart pounding faster than her mare's galloping stride. The year was 1876, and the West was still wild, untamed, and unforgiving, especially to a woman with nothing but determination in her pockets and fire in her soul. "Come on, Willow," she urged her chestnut mare, feeling the animal's muscles strain beneath her. "Just a little further." The distant silhouettes of Silvercreek's buildings shimmered in the late afternoon heat. A mirage promising salvation or damnation, Gemma wasn't yet sure which. After 3 days of hard riding, sleeping under stars that offered no comfort and eating provisions that had grown stale, all she knew was that this town represented her last hope. At 22, Gemma had already weathered more storms than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 16, when influenza took both her parents within days of each other, she'd managed their small farm in Kansas until the bank foreclosed 3 months ago. With nothing left to lose, she had followed whispers of opportunity in Colorado territory, where women of spirit and determination might carve out a future beyond the narrow confines society prescribed. As Silvercreek grew larger on the horizon, Gemma straightened her spine, ignoring the ache that had settled between her shoulder blades. Her once fine riding dress was coated in trail dust, and she knew her appearance would raise eyebrows. Still, she had no intention of slinking into town like some ashamed creature. She would ride in with her head high, regardless of what awaited her. The main street was surprisingly busy for a Wednesday afternoon. Men in dusty trail clothes mingled with merchants in waistcoats. Women in practical calico dresses hurried on errands, while a few painted ladies lingered in doorways, their bright dresses stark against the weathered buildings. Gemma felt the weight of stares as she guided Willow down the center of the street. Her red-gold hair had escaped its pins during the journey, cascading in untamed waves down her back. Her boots were scuffed, her gloves worn through at the fingertips. But her posture remained regal, her gaze steady as she assessed the town that might become her home or just another disappointment. She reined Willow to a halt outside the Western Union office, dismounting with a wince as her stiff legs protested. Tying the horse to the hitching post, she paused to stroke the animal's sweaty neck. "We made it, girl," she murmured. "Now we just need to find work and a place to stay before nightfall." The telegraph operator barely glanced up as Gemma entered, his spectacles perched on the end of his nose as he tapped out a message. "Be with you in a moment," he muttered. Gemma took the opportunity to straighten her appearance as best she could, brushing dust from her skirts and attempting to tame her wild hair. By the time the operator looked up, she had managed to pin back the worst of it. "How can I help you, miss?" His tone suggested he wasn't particularly interested in helping at all. "I'm inquiring about the teaching position," Gemma said, drawing a folded newspaper clipping from her reticule. "The advertisement said to inquire at this office." The man's eyebrows rose as he took in her trail-worn appearance. "That position's been filled as of yesterday." His mouth curled slightly. "Town council wouldn't likely hire someone who looks like they just rolled in with a cattle drive anyway." Gemma fought to keep her expression neutral, though disappointment settled in her stomach like a stone. "I see. Are there any other positions suitable for an educated woman in Silvercreek?" the operator snorted. "Depends what kind of work you're willing to do. Saloons always hiring girls." His insinuation hung in the air between them. Gemma's chin lifted higher. "I was thinking more along the lines of bookkeeping or secretarial work," she replied coolly. "I've managed a farm's accounts for 6 years and can provide references." "Ain't much call for lady bookkeepers here," he said, turning back to his telegraph. "You might try the mercantile. Old man Pullman's wife is ailing, might need help with their books." He paused, eyeing her critically. "Though you might want to clean up first impressions and all that." Fighting the urge to inform him exactly what her first impression of him was, Gemma nodded curtly. "Thank you for the suggestion. Is there a boarding house where a respectable woman might stay?" Widow Jensen's, 2 blocks north, blue house with white trim. He'd already dismissed her, his attention returning to his work. Outside, Gemma leaned against Willow for a moment, gathering her strength. The journey had left her more exhausted than she'd realized, and the disappointing news about the teaching position had deflated her remaining reserves of optimism. Still, she hadn't come this far to surrender at the first setback. She led Willow toward the livery stable she'd spotted on her way into town, hoping the charges wouldn't deplete her meager savings too severely. The livery was a large, weathered building at the edge of town, the scent of hay and horses growing stronger as she approached. A man emerged from the shadows of the stable, wiping his hands on a rag. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his Stetson. His face was tanned from long days in the sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes suggesting he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now as he assessed Gemma and her horse. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was deep and tinged with a southern drawl. "I need to board my mare," Gemma said. "And perhaps get directions to Widow Jensen's boarding house." The man nodded, stepping forward to take Willow's reins. His fingers brushed against Gemma's, calloused but surprisingly gentle. "I'm Jake Valentine, stable master. Your horse looks like she's had a long journey." Gemma Keller. "And yes, we've come from Kansas." She stroked Willow's nose. "She's been a loyal companion." Jake ran a practiced eye over the mare. "Fine animal. I'll make sure she gets good care." He glanced at Gemma, his gaze sharpening. "Kansas is a fair distance. What brings you to Silvercreek?" Gemma hesitated, unsure how much to reveal to this stranger. "A fresh start," she finally said. "Though I've already discovered the teaching position I came for has been filled." Something flickered in Jake's expression. "The school board hired the mayor's niece yesterday." "Politics," he said with a slight shake of his head. "You're a teacher then?" "I was for a time, before my parents died and I had to take over our farm." The words came out more bitterly than she'd intended. Jake nodded, his expression softening. "Silvercreek could use more educated folks." "Don't give up just yet." He reached for Willow's saddlebags. "Let me help you with these." "I can manage," Gemma started to say, but the weariness must have shown on her face because Jake shook his head. "No doubt you can, Miss Keller, but there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered without strings." He hoisted the bags easily. "I'll walk you to Widow Jensen's. It's on my way." The lie was transparent. The stable was in the opposite direction from where the telegraph operator had pointed, but Gemma found herself grateful for the escort. Silvercreek streets were growing more crowded as evening approached, and she was conscious of curious stares following her progress. "Folk aren't used to seeing new faces," Jake explained as they walked. "Especially not a woman traveling alone. They'll settle down once you've been here a spell." "If I stay," Gemma said. "Without work, my options are limited." Jake adjusted his hat, squinting down the street. "What kind of work are you looking for, besides teaching?" "I'm a fair hand with numbers. Bookkeeping, accounting. I managed all the finances for our farm." Gemma stepped carefully around a puddle in the rutted street. "I can turn my hand to most things if given the chance." Jake seemed to be considering something. "My brother owns the Silver Dollar Saloon. Now, before you get offended," he added quickly, seeing Gemma's expression, "he needs someone to manage the books and handle correspondence. Previous fellow ran off with a dance hall girl and $300. James, that's my brother, has been pulling his hair out trying to keep up with it himself." Gemma frowned. "I'm not sure a saloon is the proper place for a woman of respectable standing. You'd work in the office upstairs, away from the main floor, strictly business matters." Jake stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "It pays well and James is fair. You wouldn't have to serve drinks or entertain." The offer was tempting. Gemma's funds were limited and beggars, as her father used to say, couldn't be choosers. Still, she hesitated. Working in a saloon, even in an administrative capacity, would raise eyebrows. "I'll consider it," she finally said. "But I should speak with your brother directly." Jake smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less." He gestured to a neat blue house with white trim and a small garden in front. "Here's Widow Jensen's. I can come by tomorrow morning to introduce you to James, if you're amenable." Gemma nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after her journey. "That would be agreeable, Mr. Valentine. Thank you, Jake," he corrected. "Everyone calls me Jake." "Jake, then." Gemma found herself returning his smile, the first genuine one she'd managed since arriving in Silvercreek. Until tomorrow. Widow Jensen proved to be a stout, no-nonsense woman in her 50s, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing and a tongue that spared no one's feelings. She looked Gemma over with undisguised assessment. $3 a week gets you a room and 2 meals a day, she announced without preamble. Baths extra, but you look like you could use one, so I'll throw in the first for free. Gemma blinked at the woman's directness but appreciated it after the thinly veiled contempt of the telegraph operator. Thank you, Mrs. Jensen. That's most kind, the widow snorted. Not kindness, practicality. Can't have you stinking up my clean sheets. Her expression softened marginally. You traveling alone, girl, that's a hard road. I am, Gemma acknowledged, but I'm used to making my own way. Something like approval flickered in the older woman's eyes. Well, you'll find Silvercreek has its share of gossips and fools, but there's good folk too. Mind your reputation, work hard, and you'll do well enough. She eyed Jake's retreating back. Valentine boys are decent men if that's what brought you to my doorstep. Gemma felt heat rise in her cheeks. Mr. Valentine merely escorted me here after stabling my horse. He mentioned a possible position with his brother's business. At the Silver Dollar, Mrs. Jensen raised an eyebrow. Respectable enough work if you're doing the books. James Valentine runs a clean establishment compared to most. She picked up Gemma's saddlebags. Come along then. You look ready to drop, and that bath won't draw itself. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a bureau. A window overlooked the street, letting in the last of the day's light. After the grueling journey, it seemed like a palace to Gemma. The promised bath was heaven, hot water easing the aches from her travel-worn body. By the time Gemma sat down to a simple but hearty dinner of beef stew and fresh bread, she felt almost human again. Mrs. Jensen proved surprisingly talkative over the meal, filling Gemma in on the town's history and notable citizens. Silvercreek had been founded 10 years earlier when silver was discovered in the nearby mountains. The boom had attracted the usual mix of honest workers, opportunists, and outlaws. The Valentine brothers came in 71, Mrs. Jensen explained, refilling Gemma's coffee cup. James won the Silver Dollar in a poker game from a man who was more bluff than skill. Jake was already running the livery. They've done well for themselves, helped civilize the town some. They're well respected then, Gemma asked, thinking of the potential position. James serves on the town council. Jake keeps more to himself, but folks trust him with their horses, which says plenty out here. Mrs. Jensen studied Gemma over her coffee cup, both unmarried if you're wondering. Not for lack of willing women, mind you. Gemma nearly choked on her coffee. I assure you my interest is purely professional. Mrs. Jensen's knowing smile suggested she didn't believe that for a moment. Of course, dear, just providing information about your potential employer. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Gemma stared at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the town gradually quieting. Somewhere in the distance, a piano played in one of the saloons, the notes drifting on the night air. She thought of her parents, wondering what they would think of her current circumstances. Her father, practical and forward-thinking, would likely approve of her determination to make her own way. Her mother might be more concerned about appearances, but she had always encouraged Gemma's independence. I'll make you proud, Gemma whispered to the darkness. Somehow. Jake arrived promptly at 9 the next morning, hat in hand as Mrs. Jensen showed him to the parlor where Gemma waited. She had risen early, determined to present a more polished appearance. Her riding dress had been brushed and pressed as best she could manage, her hair neatly pinned, and her boots cleaned of trail dust. Jake's appreciative glance as he entered suggested her efforts had been successful. Good morning, Miss Keller. I trust you rested well. Very well, thank you. Gemma rose, smoothing her skirts. Mrs. Jensen keeps a comfortable house. Best boarding house in town, Jake agreed with a smile for the widow, who harumphed but looked pleased. My brother's expecting us if you're ready. The morning air was crisp and clear, the street already busy with the day's commerce. Gemma noticed several people nodding to Jake as they passed, his popularity evident in the friendly greetings. You seem well liked in town, she observed. Jake shrugged, adjusting his stride to match hers. Been here long enough to know most folks. It's not a large community when you strip away the transients. And which are you, Mr. Valentine, settler or transient? Gemma asked, curious about the man beside her. Settled as a fence post these days, Jake replied with a slight smile. Though I had my share of wandering before finding Silvercreek, what about you? Is Colorado just another stop on your journey, or are you looking to put down roots? Gemma considered the question. I hadn't thought much beyond finding work. After losing the farm, I've been wary of becoming too attached to any place. Jake nodded, understanding in his eyes. Loss has a way of making a person cautious, but sometimes roots find you when you least expect it. They reached the Silver Dollar, an imposing two-story building with a freshly painted facade. Despite the early hour, the double doors stood open, though the saloon appeared empty save for a man sweeping the floor and another polishing glasses behind the long bar. James keeps it open all day, Jake explained, noting Gemma's surprise. Says there's always someone wanting a drink or a quiet place to conduct business, regardless of the hour. The interior was more elegant than Gemma had expected. Polished wooden floors, quality furnishings, and large mirrors created an atmosphere of surprising refinement. No painted women lounged about, no card sharks hunched over tables, just a clean, well-maintained establishment that wouldn't have looked out of place in a more civilized city. Jake. Right on time, called a voice from the staircase at the rear of the room. James Valentine descended with confident steps. He resembled his brother, sharing the same dark hair and tall build, though his features were sharper, his manner more polished. Where Jake had the rugged quality of a man who worked outdoors, James possessed the smooth confidence of someone accustomed to dealing with people from all walks of life. Miss Keller, I presume. He extended his hand, his grip firm when she took it. My brother speaks highly of your qualifications, though he was rather vague on the details. Because she hasn't told me all of them yet, Jake said with a grin. Miss Keller only arrived yesterday. Gemma straightened her shoulders. I managed my family's farm and all its financial matters for 6 years, Mr. Valentine. I'm proficient in bookkeeping, correspondence, and basic accounting. I was also educated at the female seminary in St. Louis and served as a teacher there briefly before returning home to care for my parents. James raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. More qualified than I dared hope. Would you care to see the office? I can explain the position in more detail if you're interested. I would appreciate that, Gemma replied, determined to maintain a professional demeanor despite her reservations about working in a saloon. The office was located at the top of the stairs, well removed from the main floor. Unlike the orderly saloon below, this room was in a state of barely contained chaos. Papers littered every surface, ledgers stood in precarious stacks, and correspondence spilled from overstuffed folders. As you can see, James said with a rueful smile, I'm in desperate need of someone with organizational skills. My previous clerk left rather abruptly 3 weeks ago, and I've been attempting to manage on my own. Gemma surveyed the disarray, already mentally cataloging what needed to be done. Your filing system seems non-existent, she observed, moving to examine one of the ledgers. She frowned at the haphazard entries. And your bookkeeping methods are creative. Jake coughed, clearly hiding a laugh. James looked momentarily startled by her frankness before breaking into a hearty chuckle. Direct and observant, I like that. He gestured to the desk. The position pays $40 a month with Sundays off. Hours would be from 9 until 5, though occasionally I might need you to stay later if we're reconciling the week's accounts or preparing tax documents. It was a generous salary, more than Gemma had earned teaching. The position would allow her to rebuild her savings while determining her next steps. Would my duties be confined to this office? She asked, needing clarification. Entirely, James assured her. I'm looking for an administrative assistant, not a barmaid or entertainer. Your reputation would remain intact, he hesitated. Though I won't pretend there won't be talk, a single woman working at a saloon, even in this capacity, will raise eyebrows. I'm familiar with small-town gossip, Mr. Valentine, Gemma said dryly. My concern is whether the talk would affect my ability to settle in Silvercreek, or find other employment should this position prove temporary. Jake, who had been leaning against the doorframe watching the exchange, straightened. Folks here judge on actions more than rumors, Miss Keller. Prove yourself hardworking and honest and most will come around. Gemma studied the brothers, weighing her options. The position offered financial security and interesting work. The risks to her reputation seemed manageable, especially since she had few alternatives. Very well, she decided. I accept the position, Mr. Valentine. When would you like me to begin? Relief washed over James's face. Immediately, if you're willing. This chaos grows by the day. I can start tomorrow, Gemma proposed. That will give me time to make proper arrangements at Mrs. Jensen's and retrieve my trunk from the livery. I'll bring your things to the boarding house this afternoon, Jake offered. Excellent. James extended his hand again. Welcome to the Silver Dollar, Miss Keller. I have a feeling this arrangement will benefit us both. As they descended the stairs, Jake fell into step beside Gemma. You've made my brother a happy man. He's been pulling his hair out trying to manage the accounts. I noticed, Gemma replied with a small smile. It will take considerable time to sort through that mess. If anyone can do it, I suspect it's you. Jake's expression was warm with approval. You're not what I expected, Miss Keller. Oh, and what did you expect? Someone more conventional, perhaps, less willing to take risks. He guided her around a muddy patch in the street. Most women arriving alone in a town like Silvercreek are either running from something or have nothing left to lose. Perhaps both apply in my case, Gemma admitted, though I prefer to think of it as running toward something rather than away. Jake studied her for a moment. I hope you find what you're looking for here. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Gemma, a place that had been carefully guarded since her parents' deaths. She looked away, suddenly afraid he might see too much in her expression. Thank you for your help, Mr. Valentine. I should return to Mrs. Jensen's to prepare for tomorrow. Jake tipped his hat, respecting her sudden withdrawal. Until later, then. Gemma's first day at the Silver Dollar proved even more challenging than anticipated. James's creative bookkeeping was worse than chaotic. It was nearly incomprehensible. Multiple ledgers contained conflicting information. Receipts were stuffed haphazardly into drawers, and several important documents appeared to be missing entirely. By mid-afternoon, Gemma had created neat stacks across every surface, each representing a different category of the saloon's business. Her back ached from bending over ledgers, and her fingers were stained with ink, but she felt the satisfaction of progress. James appeared in the doorway with a tray bearing coffee and sandwiches. I thought you might need sustenance, he said, clearing a space on the desk. How bad is it? Gemma accepted the coffee gratefully. Your former clerk either was incompetent or deliberately obfuscated the records. I suspect the latter, given the missing funds I've already identified. James's expression darkened. I knew Charles had taken some cash when he left, but I hadn't realized he'd been systematically stealing. He altered entries in at least 2 ledgers, Gemma confirmed. Without a complete audit, I can't determine the full extent of his theft, but it appears substantial. Can you reconstruct the accounts? With time, yes. I'll need to create an entirely new set of books, transferring the accurate information and reconciling the discrepancies. Gemma sipped her coffee. It's fortunate I arrived when I did. A few more months of this, and untangling the mess might have been impossible. James sighed heavily. I trusted the wrong man. It seems to be a pattern with me. Trust isn't a weakness, Mr. Valentine, Gemma said. But perhaps verification would be prudent in the future. That drew a chuckle from him. Indeed. Well, I'll leave you to it. Don't work too late on your first day. Gemma lost track of time as she sorted through the financial chaos. The saloon below grew busier, the murmur of voices and occasional bursts of laughter drifting up the stairs. At some point, a piano began playing, the cheerful tune a counterpoint to her methodical work. The knock on the door frame startled her. Gemma looked up to find Jake watching her, amusement evident in his expression. Do you always become so absorbed in numbers that you forget the time? He asked, gesturing to the window where darkness had fallen. Gemma blinked, suddenly aware of how stiff her shoulders had become and how the lamp's light was now the only illumination in the room. I hadn't realized it was so late. It's past 7. Mrs. Jensen sent word that she's holding dinner for you, but she won't wait much longer. Jake stepped into the office, surveying the organized chaos. You've made progress. Some, Gemma acknowledged, rising and stretching discreetly. There's still much to do. Rome wasn't built in a day, Jake quoted, offering his arm. Come, I'll walk you back. The streets can be lively at this hour. The transformation of Silvercreek after dark was remarkable. Lanterns illuminated storefronts, saloons pulsed with activity, and the boardwalks teemed with miners, cowboys, and townspeople seeking evening entertainment. Men called greetings to Jake as they passed, their curious gazes lingering on Gemma. Word travels fast, Jake observed, nodding to a group of cowboys outside the blacksmith's. Everyone knows you're working for James already. Is that why they're staring? Gemma asked, uncomfortably aware of the attention. Partly, Jake admitted, though a beautiful woman would draw looks regardless. The unexpected compliment flustered Gemma, and she was grateful for the dim lighting that hid her blush. You're too kind, Mr. Valentine, Jake, he reminded her. And it's not kindness to state facts, Miss Keller. A commotion ahead interrupted their conversation. A crowd had gathered outside the general store, voices raised in anger. As they drew closer, Gemma could make out a young woman at the center of the group, her head bowed as several townswomen berated her. Shameless hussy. No decent woman would behave so. Think of the example you're setting for our children. The young woman couldn't have been more than 18 or 19, her simple dress and worn shawl suggesting modest circumstances. Her dark hair fell across her face as if she were trying to hide behind it. What's happening? Gemma asked, slowing her pace. Jake's expression had hardened. That's Sarah Miller. She works at the telegraph office helping her father. Seems she's drawn someone's disapproval. As they watched, the telegraph operator, the same unpleasant man Gemma had encountered yesterday, emerged from the crowd, his face mottled with anger. My own daughter, he shouted. Sneaking around with that no-good saddle tramp. I've worked hard to give you a respectable life, and this is how you repay me. The girl Sarah finally raised her head, revealing a tear-stained face and defiant eyes. Thomas is a good man, father. He wants to marry me. He's nothing but a drifter. Her father spat. No job, no prospects, no family name worth speaking of. He's found work at the Anderson Ranch, Sarah protested. He's saving for a place of our own. One of the townswomen stepped forward, her expression pinched with righteous indignation. A decent girl doesn't meet a man in secret, Sarah Miller. You've disgraced your father and this town with your behavior. The crowd murmured agreement, closing in around the young woman. Gemma felt something twist inside her at the familiar scene, the self-appointed moral guardians, the public humiliation, the harsh judgment without context or compassion. How many times had she witnessed similar treatment of young women whose only crime was following their hearts? Before she could reconsider, Gemma was striding forward, breaking free of Jake's light grasp on her arm. Excuse me, she called, her voice clear and carrying. I believe the Bible cautions against casting the first stone. The crowd parted, heads turning in surprise as Gemma approached. She positioned herself beside Sarah, who stared at her in astonishment. You don't understand, miss, one woman began. This girl has been meeting a young man unchaperoned, risking her reputation, and I understand perfectly, Gemma interrupted. I understand that private matters are being dragged into public view for the entertainment of those with nothing better to occupy their time. She turned to Sarah's father. Sir, surely any concerns about your daughter's behavior would be better addressed in the privacy of your home. The telegraph operator's face darkened further. This doesn't concern you, Miss Keller, Gemma Keller. She met his gaze steadily, recognizing the moment he placed her as the travel-worn woman who had inquired about the teaching position. His lip curled slightly. Ah, James Valentine's new bookkeeper, he said, the innuendo unmistakable. I suppose birds of a feather flock together. A woman working in a saloon would naturally defend improper behavior. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and Gemma felt the weight of their judgment shift to include her. She straightened her spine, refusing to be cowed. I am indeed employed as Mr. Valentine's bookkeeper, a position requiring education and skills I'm fortunate to possess, she said clearly. just as I'm fortunate to be judged by my character and abilities rather than by the whispers of those who know nothing of my circumstances." She turned to Sarah, whose expression had transformed from misery to cautious hope. "May I walk with you, Miss Miller? I find the evening air grows chilled when the company is less than warm." For a moment, the tableau held Gemma standing tall beside the young woman, the crowd wavering between condemnation and uncertainty. Then a deep voice cut through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe this evening's entertainment has concluded." Jake stepped forward, his casual posture belied by the steel in his voice. "Unless someone's committed an actual crime, perhaps we could all return to our own affairs." His calm authority had an immediate effect. The crowd began to disperse, though not without muttered comments and backward glances. Sarah's father glowered at Gemma. "This isn't over," he warned before stalking back toward the telegraph office. As the crowd thinned, Jake moved to stand beside Gemma and Sarah. His expression, when he looked at Gemma, contained something she couldn't quite identify: respect, certainly, but also a warmth that made her breath catch. "You faced that crowd without fear," he said softly. "Not many would have the courage to stand against public opinion their first week in town." Gemma shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "It wasn't courage so much as recognition. I've seen such scenes before. They rarely end well for the woman involved." Jake studied her for a moment longer, then turned to Sarah. "Miss Miller, would you allow us to escort you home? Your father might need time to cool his temper." Sarah shook her head, wiping away the last of her tears. "Thank you, Mr. Valentine, but I should face him. Hiding will only make things worse." She turned to Gemma, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you for standing with me. No one's ever done that before." "Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to question the crowd," Gemma replied gently. "Be true to yourself, Sarah, but perhaps consider being more cautious in your meetings until your young man is established enough to speak to your father properly." After Sarah had departed, Gemma found herself walking beside Jake in thoughtful silence. The encounter had left her shaken, though she was careful not to show it. Standing up to the crowd had been instinctive, but she was acutely aware that she might have damaged her own standing in Silvercreek before she'd properly established herself. "Do you regret interfering?" Jake asked suddenly, as if reading her thoughts. Gemma considered the question. "No," she finally said. "Though I may have been impulsive, your brother might not appreciate his new employee creating controversy on her first day." "James respects conviction," Jake replied. "He's not overly concerned with conventional propriety, or he wouldn't run a saloon." He glanced sideways at her. "Besides, you're stronger than their judgment, Gemma. Anyone who takes the time to know you will see that." The use of her first name, spoken with such quiet certainty, sent an unexpected warmth through Gemma's chest. She looked up at Jake, finding his gaze steady on hers, and for a moment the bustle of the town around them seemed to fade into the background. "I hope you're right," she said softly. Mrs. Jensen was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her arms folded across her ample bosom. "I heard there was a commotion in town," she announced without preamble. "Something about you facing down half the ladies' sewing circle to defend Sarah Miller. News certainly traveled quickly in Silvercreek." Gemma sighed, preparing for another confrontation, but to her surprise, Mrs. Jensen's stern expression melted into a smile. "About time someone stood up for that girl. Her father's been suffocating her since her mother died, and those busybodies are always looking for someone to condemn." She held the door open. "Come in, both of you. I've kept dinner warm, and I suspect you could use a good meal after such excitement." Jake accepted the invitation with a tip of his hat. "Thank you kindly, Mrs. Jensen. I find standing up to public opinion builds an appetite. Over a hearty dinner of roast beef and potatoes, Mrs. Jensen filled them in on the background of the situation. Sarah's mother had died in childbirth when Sarah was just 10, leaving her father bitter and overprotective. The young man, Thomas Blackwood, had arrived in Silvercreek 2 months earlier, taking odd jobs while looking for permanent work. "He seems decent enough," Mrs. Jensen said, refilling Jake's coffee cup. "Polite, hardworking. But John Miller wants his daughter to marry someone established, a shopkeeper or professional man. He's afraid she'll end up struggling like her mother did." Fear often masquerades as control, Gemma observed, thinking of her own father's initial resistance to her teaching ambitions. He had feared for her future, wanting to protect her from disappointment or hardship. It had taken months to convince him that she needed to follow her own path. That's insightful, Jake said. Though sometimes fear is just fear, the West isn't kind to those without resources or connections. Which is why communities should support young people building their futures, not tear them down, Gemma countered. If Thomas is truly committed to Sarah, the town would benefit more from encouraging his efforts than from condemning their attachment. Mrs. Jensen chuckled. You should have been a preacher, Miss Keller. You've got a way with words. Just practical experience, Gemma replied. I've seen too many promising lives derailed by the weight of others' expectations. After dinner, Jake declined Mrs. Jensen's offer of pie, explaining he needed to check on a sick horse at the livery before turning in. At the door, he paused, his hat in his hands. I'll see you tomorrow, Miss Keller. The question seemed to carry more weight than a simple inquiry about her schedule. Gemma nodded. I'll be at the Silver Dollar by 9, assuming the town hasn't formed a committee to run me out by then. Jake's laugh was rich and genuine. Not likely. Silvercreek may gossip, but it respects spirit. You showed plenty of that today. He settled his hat on his head. Besides, anyone who tried would have to go through James and me. The simple declaration of support warmed Gemma more than it should have. Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Jake, he corrected one final time, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Good night, Gemma. As she readied for bed that night, Gemma found herself reflecting on the day's events. She had secured employment, made both allies and potential enemies, and intervened in a situation that reminded her uncomfortably of her own past. It was more excitement than she had anticipated for her first full day in Silvercreek. And then there was Jake Valentine, with his steady presence and unexpected support. Gemma wasn't naive enough to miss the interest in his eyes when he looked at her, nor foolish enough to dismiss the quickening of her own pulse when he was near. But romantic entanglements were a luxury she couldn't afford while establishing herself in a new town. Still, as she drifted toward sleep, it was Jake's words that echoed in her mind. You're stronger than their judgment, Gemma. In those words, she had heard something she'd been searching for perhaps her entire life: acceptance of her strength, rather than criticism of it. The next few weeks fell into a pattern of long days at the Silver Dollar and quiet evenings at Mrs. Jensen's boarding house. Gemma made steady progress untangling the saloon's finances, creating new ledgers and establishing proper accounting procedures. James was impressed with her efficiency and attention to detail, giving her increasing responsibility for the business's operations. True to Jake's prediction, the town's reaction to Gemma's defense of Sarah Miller had been mixed. Some, particularly the more conservative matrons, kept their distance, their disapproval evident in cool nods and whispered conversations that halted when she approached. Others, however, seemed to view her with newfound respect. Sarah herself had become a frequent visitor to Gemma's office, bringing small gifts of fresh baked cookies or wildflowers. Her father had eventually relented enough to allow Thomas to call on her properly, though under strict supervision. The young man had indeed secured steady work at the Anderson Ranch and was saving diligently for their future. Father says we must wait a year before discussing marriage, Sarah confided one afternoon as she perched on the edge of Gemma's desk. But Thomas is patient, and at least now we can see each other without sneaking around. A year will pass quickly, Gemma assured her, and it gives Thomas time to prove his intentions are honorable. Sarah's expression turned curious. What about you, Miss Keller? Mr. Jake Valentine seems quite attentive whenever you're in town together. Gemma concentrated on the ledger before her, hoping her cheeks weren't as pink as they felt. Mr. Valentine is simply being neighborly to a newcomer. He's been very helpful in introducing me to people in town. It wasn't entirely true, of course. Jake had indeed been attentive, finding reasons to visit the Silver Dollar almost daily, often escorting Gemma back to Mrs. Jensen's in the evenings. Their conversations had become the highlight of Gemma's days, ranging from discussions of books they'd both read to debates about the territory's politics. She had discovered a keen intelligence behind his easygoing manner and a depth of thought that surprised and challenged her. "Neighborly," Sarah repeated skeptically. "Is that why he brought you wildflowers last week? Or why he glares at any man who speaks to you for too long?" "You're exaggerating," Gemma protested, though she had noticed Jake's protective attitude. "Besides, I came to Silvercreek to establish myself independently, not to find a husband." Sarah slid off the desk with a knowing smile. "No one said anything about a husband, Miss Keller, but even independent women can enjoy male attention, can't they?" After Sarah left, Gemma found herself unable to concentrate on her work, her mind returning to Jake despite her best efforts. There was no denying the attraction between them, but Gemma had learned caution through hard experience. Her brief engagement 3 years ago to a banker's son had ended painfully, when he had revealed his expectation that she would abandon her teaching ambitions after marriage. The subsequent scandal when she broke the engagement had contributed to her family's increasingly isolated position in their community. A knock on the door frame interrupted her thoughts. James Valentine stood there, his expression unusually serious. "You have a moment, Miss Keller." "There's a matter I need to discuss with you." Gemma set aside her pen, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "Of course, Mr. Valentine. Is there a problem with the accounts?" "No, quite the opposite." James settled into the chair, studying her with a directness that was slightly unnerving. "Your work has been exceptional. In fact, you've accomplished in a month what I expected might take 3. The books are in order. Our profits are up thanks to your suggestions about inventory management, and I haven't had a single complaint from a supplier about late payments." "I'm pleased to hear it," Gemma said, uncertain where the conversation was heading. James leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Which is why I'm concerned about the rumors circulating in town." Gemma stiffened. "What rumors, specifically?" "That your relationship with my brother is improper, that he visits you here frequently for reasons unrelated to business." James held up a hand as Gemma began to protest. "I know they're baseless, but perception matters in a town this size. Some of the more influential citizens have begun to question whether the silver dollar should be represented by a woman whose reputation is questionable." Anger and embarrassment warred in Gemma's chest. "I have done nothing improper, Mr. Valentine. Your brother has been a friend and guide to Silvercreek, nothing more." "I believe you," James assured her, "but others are less charitable in their interpretations. Mrs. Pendergast, the mayor's wife, has been particularly vocal. She suggested to me yesterday that I should consider the moral standing of my employees." Gemma's hands clenched in her lap. Mrs. Pendergast had been among the women confronting Sarah Miller that first week. "I see. And you're concerned that my association with your business might damage its standing?" "Not at all," James said firmly. "I value your work too highly to be swayed by gossip, but I am concerned for you, Miss Keller. A woman alone must be particularly careful of her reputation, especially in a position like yours." The concern seemed genuine, which softened Gemma's response. "I appreciate your warning, Mr. Valentine. Perhaps it would be best if your brother limited his visits to the saloon." James hesitated. "Actually, I had a different suggestion. The Harvest Dance is next Saturday. It's Silvercreek's largest social event of the season, attended by everyone of consequence in town. If you were to appear there, properly escorted, it would go a long way towards silencing the rumors." "Are you suggesting I find a respectable escort to improve my social standing?" Gemma asked, unable to keep a note of incredulity from her voice. "I'm suggesting you allow Jake to escort you officially, rather than these informal walks that feed the gossip's imagination," James clarified. "A public acknowledgement of his interest would transform perception immediately. No one would dare suggest impropriety if Jake's intentions were openly declared." Gemma blinked, startled by the directness of the proposal. "Has your brother spoken to you about his intentions?" James's smile was knowing. Jake hasn't needed to speak of them. His actions have been clear enough to anyone with eyes. The question is whether you return his interest sufficiently to consider a public association. The question hung in the air between them, forcing Gemma to confront feelings she had been carefully avoiding. Did she return Jake's interest? The quickened heartbeat whenever he appeared, the lingering glances, the way their conversations flowed effortlessly for hours all suggested an attachment deeper than friendship. But was she ready to acknowledge it publicly? "I'll consider it," she finally said. Though I would prefer any invitation came from Jake himself rather than as a strategy to manage town gossip. James stood, looking satisfied. "I believe you'll find my brother more than willing to issue such an invitation, given the slightest encouragement. He's merely been respecting your apparent desire for independence." After James left, Gemma sat motionless, her mind whirling with conflicting emotions. The prospect of attending the dance with Jake both thrilled and terrified her. A public appearance together would indeed declare his interest and hers to the entire town. It would shift her carefully maintained independence into something more complicated, more vulnerable. Yet the thought of continuing as they had been, pretending their relationship was merely friendly while navigating the toxic swamp of small-town gossip, was equally unappealing. Perhaps it was time to be honest with herself and with Jake. The opportunity came sooner than she expected. That evening, as Gemma was preparing to leave, Jake appeared in her office doorway, his expression unusually hesitant. "I hear my brother has been discussing your reputation," he said without preamble. Gemma sighed, gathering her shawl. "News travels quickly in Silvercreek." "James means well," Jake said, stepping into the room. "He's concerned about the gossip affecting your position here." "And you?" Gemma asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Are you concerned about being associated with a woman of questionable reputation?" Jake's expression hardened. "The only thing questionable in Silvercreek is the judgment of those with nothing better to do than speculate about others' lives." He moved closer, his voice softening. "I care about you, Gemma, more than I should, perhaps, given your independent nature. But I won't apologize for my attention, nor will I withdraw it to satisfy the town's gossips." The raw honesty in his words struck Gemma speechless. In the silence that followed, Jake reached into his pocket and withdrew a small envelope. "I came to give you this," he said, extending it toward her. "I was going to wait, find some more romantic moment, but perhaps directness is better." Gemma took the envelope, her fingers brushing against his. Inside was a carefully penned invitation to the harvest dance, the formal language contrasting with the personal postscript. "I would be honored by your company, Gemma, not for the town's approval but for the pleasure of your presence." Emotion tightened Gemma's throat. "Jake, you don't need to answer now," he interrupted gently. "I understand if you need time to consider what it might mean for your standing in town, for your independence." Gemma looked up from the invitation to find Jake watching her with an expression of such tender hope that her carefully constructed walls began to crumble. In that moment, she recognized the truth she had been avoiding. She was falling in love with him, had perhaps been falling since that first day when he defended her against the telegraph operator's judgment. "I don't need time," she said softly. "I would be honored to attend the dance with you, Jake. Not for the town's approval, but for the pleasure of your company." The smile that broke across Jake's face was like sunrise after a long night. He took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and heart-stoppingly intimate. "Then I am the most fortunate man in Colorado territory," he murmured against her skin. The harvest dance transformed the town hall into a glittering wonderland of autumn decorations and lantern light. Tables laden with food lined one wall, while a small orchestra occupied a platform at the far end of the room. By 8 o'clock, the hall was filled with Silvercreek citizens in their finest attire, from the mayor and his wife to ranchers and shopkeepers. Gemma had agonized over her appearance, eventually selecting a gown of deep emerald silk that she had brought from Kansas but never worn. Mrs. Jensen had helped her style her hair in an elegant arrangement of curls, with a few strategically placed hairpins adorned with tiny pearl accents. "You'll be the prettiest woman there," Mrs. Jensen declared as Gemma descended the stairs to where Jake waited in the parlor. "And with the handsomest escort, too." Jake's reaction confirmed Mrs. Jensen's assessment. He stood transfixed as Gemma appeared, his eyes widening with appreciation. He himself cut a striking figure in a well-tailored black suit, his usually wind-blown hair tamed for the occasion. "You're beautiful," he said simply, offering her a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. "These pale in comparison, but I hope you'll accept them anyway." The evening began with the expected stares and whispers as they entered the hall together. Mrs. Pendergast's pinched expression suggested she had swallowed something sour, while the telegraph operator pointedly turned his back. But others were more welcoming. James greeted them warmly, introducing Gemma to several town council members and their wives with flattering comments about her work at the Silver Dollar. Sarah Miller and her Thomas waved from across the room, their own attendance together a sign of her father's growing acceptance. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Jake extended his hand. "May I have this dance, Miss Keller?" Gemma placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. Other couples moved aside, creating a momentary space that made her acutely aware of being the center of attention. But then Jake's arm slipped around her waist, his other hand holding hers with gentle strength, and the rest of the room seemed to fade away. "Everyone's watching," she murmured as they began to move with the music. "Let them," Jake replied, his eyes never leaving hers. "Perhaps they'll learn something about what truly matters." Gemma had always been a competent dancer, but with Jake, she felt graceful, effortless. They moved together as if they had been dancing for years, his lead subtle but confident, her response natural and fluid. By the time the music ended, she was flushed and breathless, not from exertion but from the intensity of Jake's gaze and the closeness of his body to hers. As the evening progressed, Gemma found herself gradually accepted into conversations, introduced to people she hadn't yet met in town. The initial chill thawed, replaced by curiosity and in some cases genuine warmth. Jake remained at her side, his hand occasionally resting lightly at the small of her back, his presence both protective and proud. During a break between dances, they stepped outside to enjoy the crisp autumn air. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds. From the town hall, music and laughter drifted out into the darkness, creating a backdrop of festive sound. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Jake asked, draping his jacket around her shoulders to ward off the chill. Gemma nodded, gazing up at the stars. "More than I expected to. Your brother was right, a public appearance has shifted perceptions." "I don't give a damn about their perceptions," Jake said with unexpected vehemence. When Gemma turned to him in surprise, he continued more softly. "I care about you, Gemma. Only you. I would attend this dance with you if the entire town turned their backs. I would walk those streets with you if every door closed in our faces." The raw emotion in his voice stole Gemma's breath. She reached up, her fingers lightly touching his cheek. "Why, Jake? You barely know me." Jake covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss against her palm. "I know enough. I know you're brave enough to start over in a strange town, smart enough to untangle years of financial chaos, and compassionate enough to defend a young woman against public condemnation. I know your smile makes my heart race, and your mind challenges mine in ways no one else ever has." He drew a shaky breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Gemma Keller. I think I started falling that first day when you arrived in Silvercreek, dusty and determined and absolutely magnificent." The declaration hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Gemma felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by emotions she had kept carefully controlled for so long. "I'm afraid," she admitted softly. "Not of you, or even of what others might think, but of losing myself again. I've worked so hard to build independence to stand on my own." "Love doesn't require surrender," Jake said, his hands gently cradling her face. "At least, not the kind of love I offer. I don't want to own you or control you, Gemma. I want to stand beside you, to build something together that's stronger than either of us could create alone." In his eyes, Gemma saw something she had been searching for perhaps her entire life, not just desire or admiration, but profound respect. Jake saw her strength and embraced it, understood her need for independence and honored it. In that moment, the last of her resistance crumbled. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered, the words both frightening and liberating. "I think perhaps I've been fighting it since that night you told me I was stronger than their judgment." Jake's smile was radiant in the starlight. "May I kiss you, Gemma?" I've been dreaming of it for weeks. Rather than answering, Gemma rose on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. His lips met hers with exquisite gentleness at first, a question rather than a demand. But when she responded, her hands sliding up to his shoulders, the kiss deepened into something more profound, a promise, a beginning. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and flushed, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I should probably take you back inside before the gossips have even more to discuss," he murmured, though he made no move to release her. Gemma laughed softly. "Let them talk. I find I care less about their opinions with each passing day." They returned to the dance, just as the orchestra began a lively reel. Flushed from more than just the cool night air, Gemma allowed Jake to lead her back onto the floor, aware of but no longer concerned by the curious glances that followed them. For the first time since arriving in Silvercreek, she felt truly at home, not because the town had accepted her, but because she had found someone who accepted her completely. The following weeks brought a transformation in Gemma's life that was both subtle and profound. Her relationship with Jake blossomed under the town's watchful but increasingly accepting gaze. They attended church together on Sundays, took rides into the countryside when weather permitted, and spent quiet evenings at Mrs. Jensen's boarding house, sometimes reading aloud to each other or simply talking late into the night. Work at the Silver Dollar continued to be engaging and rewarding. With the accounts now properly organized, Gemma had begun implementing systems to improve the saloon's profitability. James was delighted with her suggestions and had recently offered her a partnership arrangement that would give her a percentage of the increased profits her methods generated. "You've transformed this business," he told her one afternoon as they reviewed the monthly figures. "It's only fair you should benefit directly from its success." The offer represented financial security beyond what Gemma had dared hope for when she arrived in Silvercreek. Combined with her growing personal happiness, it made the difficult journey and initial struggles seem worthwhile. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to think about the future with hope rather than caution. That future took an unexpected turn on a crisp November afternoon when Jake appeared at her office, his expression unusually serious. "You have time for a ride?" he asked. "There's something I'd like to show you." Curious, Gemma set aside her work. "Of course. Let me get my shawl." They rode west out of town, following a trail that wound through golden aspen groves and across meadows where the first frost had painted the grass with silver. Jake was uncharacteristically quiet, responding to Gemma's questions with brief answers that revealed little about their destination. After nearly an hour, they crested a small rise, and Jake reined his horse to a halt. Below them lay a sheltered valley, through which a clear stream meandered. A small cabin stood near the water, smoke curling from its chimney. Behind it, a barn and corral suggested a working homestead, though on a modest scale. "What is this place?" Gemma asked, taking in the peaceful scene. "My land," Jake replied, watching her reaction carefully. "I filed a homestead claim 4 years ago. I've been working it slowly, dividing my time between here and the livery in town." Gemma looked at him in surprise. "You never mentioned owning property." "I wanted to get it properly established first." "The cabin was barely more than a shack until this past summer when I finally had time to expand it." Jake's expression grew earnest. "I've been saving and planning, Gemma. The livery pays well enough, but this land, this is my dream. 20 acres of good pasture, water rights to the stream, enough timber to last for years." Understanding began to dawn as Gemma looked from the homestead back to Jake. "This is why you came west, to build your own ranch," Jake nodded, his gaze steady on hers. "I grew up on a tenant farm in Tennessee. My father worked himself into an early grave farming another man's land. I swore I'd never do the same, that I'd own the soil I turned and the roof over my head." He gestured toward the valley. "It's not much compared to the big ranches, but it's mine. Free and clear. It's beautiful," Gemma said sincerely. "You should be proud of what you've accomplished." "I am, but it's not complete yet." Jake turned his horse to face hers fully. "A house isn't a home without the right person to share it. I brought you here today, Gemma, because I wanted you to see not just where I live, but what I'm offering." Gemma's heart began to race as Jake reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small, worn leather box. "This belonged to my mother," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band set with a small pearl. "It's not fancy or new, but the sentiment behind it is as fresh as this morning's sunrise." He took her hand, his own surprisingly steady. "Gemma Keller, I love your mind and your spirit, your courage and your heart. I love the way you face the world without fear and the way you see beyond appearances to what truly matters. I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner in all things. Will you marry me?" Emotion welled in Gemma's throat, making speech impossible for a moment. The proposal wasn't entirely unexpected. Their courtship had been progressing steadily toward this moment, but the setting, the sincerity in Jake's eyes, and the knowledge that he was offering not just his heart but his dream overwhelmed her. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice thick with feeling. "Yes, Jake, I will marry you." His smile was brilliant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. "I promise you won't regret it, Gemma. I'll spend my life making sure of it." He leaned across the space between their horses to kiss her, sealing the promise with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the man he was and the husband he would be. "Come," he said when they finally broke apart. "Let me show you the rest of our home." The cabin proved to be larger and more comfortable than it appeared from a distance. 2 main rooms comprised the living space, a kitchen and sitting area with a stone fireplace, and a bedroom with a hand-crafted bed frame and chest of drawers. Jake had built shelves along one wall, currently sparsely populated with books and a few personal items. "I thought this could be your library," he explained, watching as Gemma ran her fingers along the empty shelves. "You mentioned wanting to collect books again someday." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched Gemma deeply. Her father's library had been one of the casualties of the farm's foreclosure. The books she had grown up with sold to pay creditors. That Jake had remembered this detail and incorporated it into his plans for their home revealed the depth of his attention to her happiness. "It's perfect," she said softly, turning to embrace him. "All of it is perfect." They spent the afternoon exploring the property, Jake pointing out his plans for expansion, additional rooms for the cabin as their family grew, a larger barn for more livestock, fields he intended to cultivate come spring. Throughout his explanations ran a current of shared vision, of we and our rather than I and mine. As the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, they sat on the cabin's porch, drinking coffee and watching the changing light paint the valley in gold and amber. Gemma's head rested against Jake's shoulder, his arm warm around her waist, the weight of his mother's ring still new and wonderful on her finger. "When would you like to marry?" Jake asked, his voice rumbling pleasantly against her ear. Gemma considered the question. "Not too long an engagement, I think. Perhaps after Christmas. That would give us time to prepare properly without unnecessary delay." Jake's arm tightened around her. "Christmas it is. A new beginning for the new year." The news of their engagement spread through Silvercreek with the speed of a prairie fire. By the time they returned to town that evening, Mrs. Jensen was waiting on the porch, her usually stern countenance transformed by a broad smile. "About time," she declared, embracing Gemma with surprising enthusiasm. "I was beginning to think you two would dance around each other forever." Even those who had initially viewed Gemma with suspicion seemed to soften at the announcement of her engagement to Jake Valentine. Mrs. Pendergast, after initial sniffing disapproval, eventually extended an invitation to tea to discuss wedding preparations. The telegraph operator maintained his distance, but his daughter Sarah was among the first to offer congratulations and volunteer assistance with the ceremony. The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a whirl of preparations. Gemma continued her work at the Silver Dollar, though James had graciously adjusted her hours to accommodate wedding planning. Jake divided his time between the livery, the homestead, and Gemma, often arriving at Mrs. Jensen's with building plans to discuss or furniture samples to approve. They decided to hold the ceremony at the small church in Silvercreek on December 23rd, followed by a reception at the Silver Dollar, which James insisted on hosting. "Consider it my wedding gift," he told them. The saloon will be closed to regular business that day, reserved exclusively for your celebration." As the date approached, Gemma found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months earlier, she had arrived in Silvercreek alone and uncertain, her future as precarious as the shifting sands of the high desert. Now she stood on the threshold of a new life, surrounded by friends and about to marry a man who cherished her independence as much as he cherished her heart. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the winter sun casting long shadows across the fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Gemma woke early, too excited and nervous to sleep. Mrs. Jensen had transformed the boarding house's best parlor into a bridal preparation room, with Sarah Miller and 2 other young women from town arriving early to help with Gemma's toilette. "Something borrowed," Sarah announced, presenting Gemma with a delicate lace handkerchief. "It was my mother's. She carried it at her wedding." The gesture brought tears to Gemma's eyes. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll treasure it." Her wedding dress was simple but elegant ivory satin with pearl beading at the bodice and a modest train. Mrs. Jensen had helped her select the fabric and pattern during a trip to Denver, and a local seamstress had created the gown to Gemma's specifications. With her hair arranged in loose curls adorned with small white flowers and a lace veil secured by her mother's pearl-tipped combs, Gemma hardly recognized her reflection in the mirror. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Jensen declared, uncharacteristic tears shimmering in her eyes. "Jake Valentine is a lucky man." A knock at the door announced the arrival of James, who had offered to escort Gemma to the church in his brother's stead. His eyes widened appreciatively as she appeared in the doorway. "If Jake weren't my brother, I'd be tempting to steal you away myself," he teased, offering his arm. "You're a vision, Gemma." The church was filled to capacity. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the occasion. As the small organ began to play, and Gemma stood at the rear of the church on James's arm, she felt a moment of dizzying unreality. Was this truly happening? Was she, Gemma Keller, orphaned, foreclosed upon, and forced to seek her fortune in a strange town, truly about to marry a man who saw her as his equal and partner? Then she caught sight of Jake waiting at the altar, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to awestruck adoration as their eyes met. In that moment, all doubt vanished. This was real, and it was right, and it was the beginning of a journey she had never dared to hope for but now couldn't imagine forsaking. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Gemma would later recall fragments the warmth of Jake's hands holding hers, the sincerity in his voice as he spoke his vows, the slight tremble in her own as she responded. The minister's words washed over her like a benediction, culminating in the pronouncement that joined them as husband and wife. When Jake kissed her, gently and reverently before the assembled crowd, Gemma heard the applause as if from a distance, too caught up in the miracle of the moment to focus on anything beyond the man, who was now her husband. The reception at the Silver Dollar was a celebration unlike any Silvercreek had seen. James had transformed the saloon into a winter wonderland, with evergreen boughs, red ribbons, and hundreds of candles, creating an atmosphere of festive elegance. Tables groaned under the weight of food and drink, while musicians played cheerful tunes that soon had guests dancing despite the formal occasion. As the bride and groom, Gemma and Jake were the center of attention, accepting congratulations and well wishes from what seemed like every resident of Silvercreek. Even the telegraph operator made a brief appearance, offering a stiff nod before departing early. Mrs. Pendergast, however, surprised Gemma by embracing her warmly. "You've proven me wrong, Mrs. Valentine," the woman admitted with unexpected candor. "I misjudged you when you first arrived. Please accept my apology and my sincere wishes for your happiness." The acknowledgement, coming from one who had been among her harshest critics, touched Gemma deeply. "Thank you, Mrs. Pendergast. Your good wishes mean a great deal to me." As the celebration continued into the evening, Jake drew Gemma aside to a quiet corner. "Happy, Mrs. Valentine?" he asked, his eyes never leaving hers. "More than I ever thought possible," Gemma replied honestly, "though I'm still getting used to my new name." Jake's smile was tender as he tucked a stray curl behind her ear. "It suits you." Though I fell in love with Gemma Keller, I have to say there's something particularly satisfying about calling you my wife. And there's something particularly thrilling about being called your wife, Gemma admitted, leaning into his touch. "I never expected to find this kind of happiness, Jake. Especially not here in a town where I initially felt so out of place." "You faced every challenge without fear," Jake said softly. "From the moment you rode into Silvercreek, dusty and determined, I knew you were something special." He glanced toward the crowded dance floor. "Ready to make our escape. The horses are waiting, and I'm eager to bring my bride home." The ride to the homestead was magical, the winter landscape transformed by moonlight on snow. Jake had insisted they spend their wedding night at their home rather than in town, a decision Gemma heartily approved. As they approached the cabin, she gasped in delight. Someone James, she suspected, had decorated the porch with lanterns and evergreen garlands, creating a welcoming glow in the darkness. Inside, the fireplace had been lit, warming the cabin against the December chill. Fresh flowers stood in a vase on the table, impossibly vibrant for the season. A bottle of champagne chilled in a bucket of snow beside two crystal glasses, another of James's touches. No doubt. Jake lifted Gemma across the threshold, setting her gently on her feet before closing the door against the night. In the golden light of fire and lanterns, they stood for a moment simply looking at each other, the reality of their marriage still new and wondrous. "Welcome home, Mrs. Valentine," Jake said softly, drawing her into his arms. Gemma went willingly, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had shown her that strength and vulnerability could coexist, that independence and partnership could enhance rather than diminish each other. "Home," she echoed, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I rather like the sound of that." Epilogue: 1 year later, the Christmas Eve service at Silvercreek's church was always well attended, but this year the small building was packed to capacity. Families stood shoulder to shoulder in the aisles, children perched on parents' laps, everyone dressed in their holiday best despite the snowstorm that had blown through earlier in the day. Gemma sat in the third pew, her hand resting on the slight swell of her stomach beneath her green velvet dress. Beside her, Jake couldn't seem to stop smiling, his pride in their growing family evident in every glance he cast her way. Their first child was due in early summer, a revelation they had shared with family and close friends at Thanksgiving, but which had now become common knowledge in town. The past year had been one of growth and change, both personally and professionally. Gemma had continued working at the Silver Dollar, overseeing the expansion of the business to include a small hotel above the saloon. Her partnership with James had proved profitable beyond expectation, allowing her and Jake to accelerate their plans for developing the homestead. The cabin now boasted 2 additional rooms, a nursery adjoining their bedroom, and a proper library space where Gemma's growing collection of books had found a home. Jake had expanded the barn and added to their livestock, the beginnings of what they hoped would one day be a respectable ranch. They divided their time between town and the homestead, maintaining Gemma's room at Mrs. Jensen's for the days when her work kept her in Silvercreek late. As the minister began the Christmas story, Gemma glanced around at the familiar faces that had become her community. Mrs. Jensen sat directly behind them, her stern countenance softened by the festive occasion. James stood at the back, having arrived late from closing up the saloon. Sarah Miller and her husband Thomas, they had married in October, sat across the aisle, their hands linked in a gesture of continuous affection that made Gemma smile. Even those who had once judged her harshly now greeted her with warmth and respect. Mrs. Pendergast had become an unlikely ally, her initial disapproval transformed into admiration for Gemma's business acumen. The telegraph operator remained somewhat aloof, but his attitude had thawed considerably since his daughter's wedding, at which Gemma had served as matron of honor. As the congregation rose to sing Silent Night, Jake's arm slipped around Gemma's waist, drawing her close against his side. The familiar words of the carol rose around them, 100 voices joined in celebration of hope and new beginnings. Looking up at her husband's face in the candlelight, Gemma felt a wave of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. 1 year ago, she had stood in this same church and taken a leap of faith, trusting that the love she and Jake shared would be strong enough to weather whatever challenges life might bring. That faith had been rewarded 100-fold. In Jake, she had found not just a husband but a true partner who valued her mind as much as her heart, who supported her ambitions even as he shared his own. In Silvercreek, she had found a community that had ultimately accepted her on her own terms, recognizing her strength as an asset rather than a liability. And in herself, perhaps most importantly, she had found the courage to embrace happiness without fear, to love without reservation, to build a life that honored both her independence and her connections to others. As the final notes of the carol faded into reverent silence, Jake leaned down to whisper in her ear, "Happy anniversary, my love." Gemma turned her face to his, no longer concerned about proper church behavior or the watchful eyes of the congregation. "The first of many," she whispered back, sealing the promise with a kiss. In the warm glow of Christmas candles, surrounded by the community that had become their extended family, Gemma Valentine knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not because she had conformed to others' expectations, but because she had remained true to herself and found those who valued her authentic spirit. The journey had been challenging, the road sometimes steep and rocky, but standing here now, Gemma wouldn't have changed a single step. For it had led her home to this man, this life, this future brimming with promise, and that was worth facing any crowd without fear.